So we just heard the Finance Minister, who was quite fiery, but he is expecting a tough year in 2023. So can we expect any further financial help from you?
We've always said that as we come through this period where cost of living is top of the public's mind and top of ours too, that we will keep looking at what we can do to provide support to New Zealanders. Keep in mind a number of the initiatives we've had, half-price public transport, reduction of fuel at the pump, they keep running through summer. And of course, you've still got the benefit of that increase in the family tax credit, which the majority of families also receive.
But you can afford it because the tax take is up 10%, up by some $6 billion. You can afford another initiative.
And again, keep in mind here, we also want to maintain that level of service people expect in healthcare. We need to keep growing our workforce, education, plus, of course, continue to do what we can to support New Zealanders.
You have an announcement tomorrow.
We do.
What is it?
I'm not going to share it today. Why? But I do hope that people tune in tomorrow.
Is it along those lines? Is it cost of living? That seems to be the foremost issue.
It is the foremost issue. And we've said that it is top of our agenda. I anticipate that the cost of living and the economy, which we are prepared to campaign hard on because of our record, will likely be on everyone's agenda for the next 12 months.
In your opening speech last night, you referenced your political hero, Norman Kirk, and you mentioned that he gave a Christmas bonus to beneficiaries. Would you do that?
Well, of course, you know, one of the reasons I reflected on that is because we've also learnt that lesson. You'll see that all the way through COVID, we've had multiple increases to benefit rates, because we know that those on the lowest incomes are the hardest hit through these times, and we've seen the impact of that.
Sure, but Christmas bonus?
Well, my point that I'm making is we have done that all the way through, not necessarily at the end of the year, but multiple times we have increased the benefit.
I appreciate that, but I'm guessing that there's no initiative before Christmas.
The point that I'm making is that I'd like you to tune in tomorrow and we talk a little bit more about our next steps.
Okay.
If I may, though, you can see the impact of the decision we made to increase benefits in these times, to also increase the family tax credit, which goes to both working and non-working low and middle income earners. When you look at child hardship relative to the last economic crisis we had, the GFC, 145,000 fewer children in hardship because of the decisions that we made.
It is hard at the moment, and wage inflation is pushing people into higher tax brackets. I want to understand what your opposition is to increasing tax thresholds to make it easier for them.
The point that we've made is that these issues are all about timing. Now, you've seen the proposals made by the National Party. Of course, they go beyond just tax threshold changes.
We're just talking about tax thresholds.
But here again, it is a matter of timing. You know, issues of tax cuts during a high inflationary period, very clear that that makes the situation worse. The advice we've had is time limited, targeted. That is the way to provide support to New Zealanders without necessarily fueling the inflation issues that globally we're seeing everyone experience. We have to make sure that in supporting people, we don't exacerbate the cost of living crisis that everyone is in.
But I just want to read you this quote, if you don't mind. This year we have seen households around the world come under considerable pressure as all nations cope with rising food and petrol prices, higher mortgage repayments driven up by the credit crunch. Does that sound like now?
Oh, look, no doubt that regardless of what is causing it, supply chain constraints, of course, the food security issues we have, the energy crisis, there's a range of different factors going on now.
Because that is actually Labor Finance Minister Michael Cullen in 2008 when he announced changes to the tax threshold to cope with the global financial crisis. You just referenced the global financial crisis. It was good enough for Labor then, why not now?
Key difference? Inflation. We have to be mindful around everything that we do to make sure that New Zealanders who are experiencing an increase in the cost of living right now because of what we're seeing around those inflationary pressures aren't worsened. You know, we only have to look at the example of what has happened in the UK, where they're experiencing inflation around the 10% mark, to be sure that we don't, indeed, and National's proposal is the same, that we don't fall into that economic trap.
So it sounds to me like you are ruling out tax cuts for the next election?
No, the point that you'll hear me making here, and I'm speaking to our policy in the here and now, we have not formulated our policy around tax for the election, but what we have said is that we will be timely and targeted and cautious in all we do, support particularly our lower middle income earners, but not make it worse.
You could do it now. You don't have to wait for the next budget. You don't have to wait for an election bribe next year. You have the resources now.
No one will thank us if inflation goes up because of poor policy making.
Okay, let's talk something else now. I want to talk Rotorua and emergency housing. So your policies really are creating what I call a motel generation in Rotorua. Are you concerned about that?
Well, I think we have to look back at, the issue that everyone has been trying to solve from the beginning. When we came into office, the issue was a generation of kids learning and doing homework in cars. Now, no one wanted that. So, yes, you did see the Emergency Housing Special Needs Grant, a grant which supports people to find shelter and accommodation. You have seen an increase in demand because we haven't had enough housing. Right. Is that a long-term solution? Absolutely not.
Because the people in Rotorua now are staying up to 35 weeks in this emergency housing and they're being pulled in from around the country.
Well, first and foremost, I want kids out of cars, I want them out of garages. Do I want them long-term in hotels? No, no one does. We've actually seen a decrease, though, in the use of hotels in that area, and we've learnt a lot too.
But at the same time, the government's asking to have another 5 years of resource consent granted for those hotels, so that problem doesn't seem to be going away.
Of course, building houses isn't something we're going to be able to do overnight, and if I might dwell on Rotorua, they've had an increase in population of over roughly 8,000 people, and in that time, 1,500 consents to build houses. We are now coming in and supporting that community to get the houses that need to be built. And we've been the government that's overseeing now 13% of the public housing and community housing stock has been built under us. But can we solve it overnight? No.
And that's why you have those problems like $92 million tourism hit in Rotorua. You're creating an entrenched problem there.
Again, as I've said, get people out of cars, then get them out of hotels. We've reduced the motel use in Rotorua. We've gone from 50 to 30. I want it down to 0. But along the way, let's learn the lessons. Community have made a fair point. We've seen a concentration of where they've been used. That's obviously not worked well. So we've got to learn from that.
So
but will I relegate housing? Housing.
25,000 people on the housing register.
Oh, and again, we're also increasing the number of houses that are being built. You've not seen rates that are being built like this since, as has been said, Norm Kirk's government. We are proud of the number of houses that are being built under this government. Record numbers, record consents.
And at the same time, the housing register is also at record levels.
One point I would make there, people previously would not register because they would not be placed. That has changed under this government. Okay. But have we solved the problem entirely? No. But you are starting to see a decline in use in some areas, and Hawke's Bay is another one.
One of the issues about Rotorua is a safety concern. But there also seems to be a broader concern throughout the country. Are you soft on crime? Or why is that sticking? I mean, we've got 10 ram raids a week. A recent poll says that 70% don't believe you're dealing with gangs. Why is that label sticking?
Question I would raise, name one law that we have weakened that we believe has contributed to what we have seen in recent times.
So why is that label sticking then?
Pure politics. Look, I absolutely acknowledge we have had a spike in ram raids. There is no denying it. We're seeing the devastating impact that's having on often small business owners. Police have reported that they're starting to see now a decline, and that is because they are targeting and focusing on what is a very small group of particularly young people who are repeatedly targeting.
Has that happened fast enough? I mean, you announced sort of the help for the retailers a long time ago, but it's taken a long time to get that action into place.
And look, we have said with that funding that we put aside to try and prevent and respond, yes, we did want to speed that up. I'm told now we've had over 100 assessments that have taken place. We want that to happen as quickly as possible. But we also need to make sure we have interventions, because these and they are frankly kids. It is a small number. We have to get them off the street. We have to end the offending, and often they are in environments where that is the only practice and engagement they've seen from others. So we have to break those cycles.
You believe you're focusing on that, but I don't know whether the voters believe you're focusing on the right areas. I mean, especially if they're feeling unsafe and you've got a big legislative load, like, unpopular reforms like hate speech, Three Waters, co-governance. I mean, are you actually in touch with the electorate?
You want to ask me a question on justice, though, and the answer that I'll give is we hear that That is why we are the government who has put more police on the front line than ever before, why we have a retail unit specifically focused on targeting this form of crime, while we've had massive operations to crack down on gang activity, why we have cracked down on guns, reformed gun law, and of course started the register. We are absolutely focused on these issues of criminal justice, and do you know why? Because actually it is often our low-income communities who suffer the most from these forms of activity.
Talk about the other policies which seem to be somewhat divisive, I mean, including Three Waters. You're not going to scrap Three Waters, but will you change it?
Yeah, and look, we've said we are open to changes, but what we're standing really firm on is that this is a cost of living issue. You know, no New Zealander would thank me, I think, if they saw us, just because it would make it politically easier to walk away from it. No one would thank us then when there was an increase in their rates bill of thousands of dollars.
Nobody wants that.
No.
But also, people don't seem to want the co-governance aspect of it. Why are you so wedded to the co-governance aspect of Three Waters, but you're doing resource management reform and there's no co-governance in that?
Interestingly, I mean, I know that this is raised with me often by media, but what we see from local government, we've just had Kieran McAnulty travel around speaking to our rural councils. I think that issue was raised on one occasion in the Select Committee. The thing that actually comes through more strongly is ensuring local service delivery. Yeah. How do we make sure in the four entities, which are all designed around making sure that we get efficiencies and reduce down costs, how do we still ensure that no matter where you are in the country, if you have an issue, you can be guaranteed that you'll be served? So that has come through as a much stronger issue than what you claim co-governance is.
Still a lot of division. I mean, a couple of mayors offered you, like Bernard Hickey said, an off-ramp. Are you open to changing the Three Waters model?
And as I've said, we're open to changes. That's why we're currently going through a Select Committee process. And if you wouldn't mind just allowing us to let that run its course, because that's where the public have been engaging on this.
So would you shift on the co-governance model?
Oh, again, that just hasn't come through as the most significant issue. Local representation, local service delivery, understandably has. So let's think about how we can guarantee that for local communities. And the final thing that I'll say, cost of living is top of mind. This is a cost of living issue. You know, as I say, no one is out there campaigning for the alternative other than the National Party, which is do nothing and let rates rise, because that is inevitably what will absolutely happen if we do not change the structure of our water infrastructure.
The policies like Three Waters, the co-governance aspect of it, maybe the alcohol reforms, the insurance income, the income insurance policies, those kinds of things weren't in your manifesto. They weren't campaigned on. Can the public trust that you're going to deliver on what you said you would deliver and not bring in other aspects?
I just want to alcohol reforms. All that we've proposed here at this stage is to implement a policy that the National Party brought in 10 years ago, which hasn't been taken effect because it's got stalled in court. I don't consider that large-scale alcohol reforms. I consider it being responsive.
Three Waters co-governance wasn't mentioned until June last year.
And if Three were, well, actually, again, that's been running for 2 terms now, but Three Waters, did anyone want to have to be in this position of dealing with it? No. The only person in our caucus who I think has long seen this issue as being one that central government needed to resolve was actually Willow Jean Prime, who sat on a council and saw what happens when you don't invest. It would be politically easy to walk away, but it would not be right.
But it's about the trust of the electorate and doing what you said you would do it, and rather than bringing in other things, okay?
Well, social insurance, as you raised,
that's a new one.
Actually, one that we've been talking about as part of our work with business and with the Council of Unions. It's been open and on the agenda for some time. If I may.
Okay.
Income insurance, we're not proposing to do tomorrow. We're not even proposing next year. We're talking 2025. Lots of times for voter...
So you have to win the next election to do that. Let's talk about that then. That's right. So you are struggling in the polls to actually form a coalition, the current polls. Does all of this spell the end of Labor at the next election?
No.
How can you be so sure? The numbers don't lie.
Well, first of all, because actually what most polls are showing is a neck-and-neck race, which is MMP government. Also, there is a year before the election. And do you know why I feel confident? Is because we're not asking New Zealanders to vote based on what just we say, but on what they've seen. And the most important issues that I think New Zealand will be looking to next election, who is going to make sure I can still access decent health care, decent education, who's going to ensure that we have low unemployment and dignity of work for all, who will make sure that we're focused on low and middle income earners and the cost of living.
Yes.
And it will be us, because that is what we have done for 5 years now.
You've had the first ever historic MMP majority. How have you managed to go from that to actually having a neck-and-neck race in the polls?
No one would argue that 2020, or indeed the last 3 years, have been normal. That was not your usual election. I imagine that next year will be a classic MMP election. Labor has won those neck and neck and tight races before, and in fact we've often come back from disadvantaged.
Yeah.
But because we have campaigned on what New Zealanders care about.
Do you think the fact that you've had an absolute majority has led to a sort of sense of invulnerability by Labor, a sort of sense of political privilege?
Absolutely not.
It's been a divisive year. There's been an attack on your office. There's a lot of hate. Well, there's been a lot of hate of the parliamentary process. I mean, are you picking up that there is a shift in the political atmosphere as we're heading into this election?
I wouldn't describe it as the political atmosphere singularly. Look, I've been in politics, going on 15 years. I don't think anyone should ever accept that this is the case, but politicians do from time to time, from a small minority of individuals, often experience what most New Zealanders would consider pretty distasteful stuff.
So,
my concern is that it actually is what we're seeing more broadly, not just experienced by politicians, but by public servants, by people who may speak up and share an opinion that is that others don't like.
So we have that more divisive
I wouldn't.
Society at the moment.
Look, I don't want to concede that because we have a small majority who are behaving in that way, that constitutes division across society as a whole. I don't.
Well, what about you?
But I do consider that a key concern for New Zealanders, and we know this because they've told us this, is what mis and disinformation is doing to our communities, and that affects all of us.
If you win next election, what is the next ambitious area of reform?
You want me to name one?
Okay, just name one then.
Look, for me, the next 12 months, no reform can be a singular focus without focusing on the everyday. The cost of living every day for New Zealanders will be the biggest focus. But what we've shown is no matter what comes our way, an economic crisis, a health crisis, we will still make progress on the issues New Zealanders care about. So yes, cost of living, but also housing, child poverty, mental health and healthcare, and climate change.
And to deliver that, finally, Prime Minister, do you commit to staying for the full third term if you win the next election?
I've continually said I'm not going anywhere.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.